The broadcast began at 3:47 local time on Axis Prime, cutting through every frequency the FiStorie ascendancy owned. Cale Mercer sat in a basement 300 meters below the planet's communication spire, his hands steady on the transmission rig his team had spent 4 months building from stolen parts. The signal hijack was active. Every screen on the capital world, every public display, every private terminal, every military command channel, every auction house ticker showed his face. He did not smile. He did not raise his voice. "My name is Cale Mercer," he said. "Sergeant, United Earth Marines, 14th Expeditionary, Service number 77419. I am speaking to you from inside your capital. I am speaking to you on every channel you own. And I am going to tell you what happens next." Above him, the spire's own amplification array, the same tower the FiStorie had used for 3 centuries to broadcast slave auction schedules, compliance updates, and population transfer manifests across 47 worlds, pushed his words into the dark of a capital city that had never heard a human voice on its airwaves before. Every FiStorie citizen on Axis Prime heard him. Every military garrison, every administrative office, every slave pen, especially every slave pen. In the underground barracks beneath the District 14 textile mills, 900 human children lay on metal bunks, listening. Most did not understand Galactic Standard well enough to follow every word, but they understood the language it was spoken in. They understood that someone was speaking English beneath the translation layer, and they understood, with the bone-deep recognition of the stolen, that the voice belonged to someone who had come for them. 17 months earlier, the colony ship Thessalonica had dropped out of transit drive with 4,112 civilians aboard, families, teachers, medical personnel, agricultural specialists, and 300 children under the age of 6, all bound for the new settlement on Meridian 4. They emerged from transit at the planned coordinates, ran their standard post-jump diagnostics, and transmitted their arrival confirmation to UEN Navigation Control. The FiStorie intercepted it 47 minutes later. 3 patrol cruisers, standard interdiction formation. The Thessalonica was a colony transport. It carried no weapons. Its hull was not armored. Its captain, a civilian merchant marine officer named Dara Akafer, transmitted on all open channels. Civilian vessel, 4,000 souls aboard, requesting passage or rerouting instructions. The FiStorie did not respond to the hail. They boarded at 14:23 hours, 200 armed soldiers in sealed combat armor. They moved through the ship deck by deck, corridor by corridor, rounding passengers into the central cargo holds with neural disruption prods. Families that resisted separation were subdued with targeted cranial pulses that left adults unconscious for hours. Children who ran were collected by automated retrieval drones, small hovering units designed, Mercer would later learn, specifically for the capture of panicking juveniles. The FiStorie had done this many times before. Within 6 hours, the Thessalonica was empty. Its passengers had been sorted into 3 categories based on physical capacity and neural compliance compatibility scores. Category 1, adult males with high physical thresholds, was routed to the lithium extraction shafts on Korath 9. Category 2, adult females and older adolescents, was routed to the chemical processor plants on Axis 7. Category 3, all children under 14, was routed to the textile mills on the capital itself. The ship was scuttled. Its debris was left to drift. 4,112 human beings, branded with neural compliance induction tattoos within 48 hours of capture, separated by age and body mass, distributed across an 800-year-old slave economy as though they were bulk cargo. The FiStorie ascendancy did not send Earth a notification. They did not consider it necessary. In 8 centuries of operation, no one had ever come looking for lost cargo. Earth found out 6 weeks later. A maintenance drone from the Thessalonica, a small automated repair unit that had been cycling through hull inspection at the time of boarding and had been overlooked during the scuttling, drifted on its last battery reserves into the patrol range of the UEN destroyer Kestrel. The drone's memory core contained the ship's black box data, full sensor recordings of the boarding, the passenger manifests, the FiStorie ship registrations, and 47 minutes of audio from the cargo holds. The audio reached Admiral Chen Weilin's desk within 3 hours of recovery. She listened to it once, then she listened to it again. Then she made a call to UEN Strategic Operations Command and said 4 words, "I need deep cover." The response was not immediate. Not like the others, not like Operation Pale Meridian, where 14 fleets had struck simultaneously within days of provocation. Not like the Citadel Line, where Admiral Voss had met the Velori with massed warships within a week. Admiral Chen Weilin understood something the other responses had not required. The hostages were distributed. 4,000 humans scattered across 7 worlds, embedded in the machinery of an alien economy. Any conventional military response, fleet arrival, orbital bombardment, blockade would turn those 4,000 people into leverage, or corpses. She called a single meeting, 12 people, a room with no windows and no recording devices. "We are not going to burn them," she said to her staff. Her voice was level, her posture composed, but her hands on the table were flat, and the people who knew her recognized that flatness as the thing she did instead of making fists. "We are not going to arrive with 900 warships and demand surrender. They have 4,000 of our people woven into their infrastructure. Orbital bombardment kills our own. A blockade starves our own. A fleet action drives them to use hostages as shields." She pulled up the FiStorie territorial map, 47 worlds, 800 years of accumulated control systems, 6 major species groups held under neural compliance, an economy that had not functioned without forced labor since before humans achieved interstellar travel. "Their entire system depends on one thing," she said. "The compliance signal. 7 spires broadcast it. Every branded being within range is neurally suppressed, reduced volition, reduced resistance, reduced capacity for coordinated action. Without those spires, 47 million captive beings wake up simultaneously." She let that number settle in the room. "We are going to take it apart from the inside, piece by piece, and when the last piece falls, they will have nothing left to bargain with." Operation Domino was authorized 9 days later. Budget classified. Timeline 14 months minimum. Acceptable casualties 0. Cale Mercer was not the first operative inserted into FiStorie space. He was not the most senior, but he was the one who understood the architecture. Before the Marines, before the 14th Expeditionary, Mercer had been a communications engineer, civilian sector, deep space relay maintenance. He had spent 6 years building and repairing the signal infrastructure that held interstellar civilization together. He understood cascade failure the way a cardiologist understood infarction, where to place the clot, which vessels would die first, how quickly the damage would become irreversible. Admiral Chen's intelligence directorate had spent 3 months mapping the FiStorie compliance network before Mercer was even briefed. What they found was elegant in its cruelty. 7 spires, each broadcasting a continuous neural suppression signal calibrated to the specific induction tattoo frequencies of the species on that world. The spires were hardened, shielded, surrounded by garrison forces, and monitored by dedicated maintenance crews. Each one was, individually, nearly impregnable. But they were not redundant. Kill one, and that world woke up. Kill all 7 simultaneously, and the entire system collapsed before the ascendancy could adapt. The window between the first strike and their adaptive response was estimated at 4 minutes. 4 minutes to kill 7 spires across 7 star systems separated by light years of void. The solution was elegant. You did not attack the spires from outside. You placed your people inside months in advance, building their tools molecule by molecule from smuggled components that would not trigger FiStorie material scanners. And you synchronized the strike to the millisecond, using quantum-locked burst channels that the FiStorie did not know existed. Mercer's cell was designated Cell 1, Axis Prime, the capital. The hardest target, 12 operators, inserted over a period of 4 months using 6 different cover identities. Each one entered FiStorie space as something the Ascendancy did not monitor: waste management workers, sanitation contractors, maintenance laborers for non-critical infrastructure. The FiStorie did not watch their own sewers. That had been true for 800 years. It would be the last thing that was true about their empire. You took our people, Mercer continued on the broadcast, his voice level almost conversational. You branded them. You separated children from parents and called it economics. You have done this to dozens of species for 8 centuries, and every single one of those species is listening to me right now. In the basement around him, his 11-person cell worked with mechanical precision. Each movement rehearsed 100 times in the months of preparation. Lyra Okonkwo, former UEN network warfare specialist, current demolitions and electromagnetic systems expert, had the shaped charges positioned around the spire's primary signal conduit. Not explosive charges, electromagnetic pulse devices, precisely calibrated to permanently overload every circuit in the conduit array without physical detonation. The spire would stand. Its guts would be cooked. Yusuf Hadid, quantum communications officer, monitored the countdown synchronization feed from all 7 cells. His display showed 7 green status lights, 7 confirmation codes, 7 countdowns aligned to the same universal reference clock. 11 milliseconds of acceptable variance. They were within 3. Private Tomas Reyes stood at the reinforced basement door, the only entry point to their position, with a compact pulse rifle and the steady calm of a man who had made peace with every possible outcome of the next 5 minutes. His job was not to win a fight. His job was to buy 30 seconds if the door was breached early. Above them, Mercer could hear the boots. The FiStorie security forces had traced the signal hijack to the spire's sub-basement level within 90 seconds of broadcast initiation. They were moving downward now, 2 floors above, cutting through the first of 4 reinforced doors Mercer's team had welded shut during their setup phase. Each door would buy them approximately 40 seconds. They needed 120 more. The FiStorie High Ascendant, Lord Vas Keithrani, watched the broadcast from his private residence at the pinnacle of the administrative spire, 3 kilometers from the communication tower, 52 floors above the capital streets. His reaction was not panic. Panic was for subordinates. His reaction was contempt. "One human," he said to his security chief, Overseer Veles, "in our basement. Broadcasting threats, find him, kill him, restore normal programming." Ascendant, the signal originates from inside the spire's own amplification infrastructure. He has physically spliced into our broadcast conduit. We cannot isolate his feed without. Then destroy the array. Veles hesitated. This was the hesitation that would later be cited at tribunal as evidence that even Keithrani's own staff understood what was at stake. Ascendant, destroying the amplification array would simultaneously terminate compliance signals to 40 million laborers on this world. The array is the compliance signal. They are the same system. Lord Keithrani's expression did not change. Then cut the human's feed without destroying the array. Surely this is within the competence of my security apparatus. Veles bowed and left. He did not mention that his technical teams had been attempting exactly that for the past 73 seconds, and that the human signal was encrypted with a protocol their systems could not parse. He would mention it later, after it no longer mattered. Lord Keithrani turned back to the screen. Mercer's face filled it, angular, dark-eyed, clean-shaven, wearing what appeared to be civilian maintenance coveralls. Not a uniform, not armor. The man looked like a janitor making a philosophical argument. But his eyes. Lord Keithrani had ruled 57 billion subjects for 31 years. He had seen supplication, terror, defiance, rage, resignation. He had never seen what was in this human's eyes. This human looked like a man who had already won, who was speaking not to threaten, not to demand, not to negotiate, but to explain, as though the outcome were already settled and the broadcast was merely a courtesy. That thought settled into Lord Keithrani's chest like a cold stone. Across 7 star systems, in 7 underground positions, 84 humans watched the same countdown tick toward 0. On Korath 9, the lithium extraction world, where 300 human men from the Thessalonica worked 16-hour shifts in shafts so deep the rock temperature exceeded 60 degrees Celsius. Cell 2 leader Lieutenant Priya Anand crouched beneath the mine's secondary processing facility. She had spent 4 months as a waste disposal laborer in this complex. She had walked past the men from the Thessalonica every day. She knew their faces. She knew which ones had stopped recognizing their own names. She knew which ones still whispered to each other at night about the children they had not seen in 17 months. She had not been able to tell them. Operational security was absolute. No contact, no signals, no hope offered until the moment hope became fact. 41 seconds. On Axis 7, the chemical processing world, where 400 human women and 2,000 Silthari ran continuous 12-hour shifts, feeding raw minerals into refinement, cascades, Cell 3 leader Sergeant Cole Brannigan lay on his belly in a drainage tunnel that smelled of industrial solvent and copper. His team had crawled 9 kilometers through effluent channels over 3 nights to reach the spire's subbasement. 2 of his operators had chemical burns on their arms from the residue. They had not spoken about it. It did not matter now. 34 seconds. On Tesek 12, Cell 4's position was inside the spire itself. Specialist Raina Volkov and her team had been posing as a licensed repair crew for 6 weeks, replacing authentic signal components with their own EMP-rigged hardware one piece at a time. By the time the countdown reached 0, their modifications would not merely disable the conduit, they would trigger a cascading firmware overwrite that would render the entire planetary defense synchronization grid inoperable for an estimated 19 days. 27 seconds. On Corinth 3, on Velisi Prime, on Dratha's Reach, on the orbital station at Null 7. 7 cells, 7 spires, 7 countdowns aligned to within 11 milliseconds of simultaneous detonation. "I want you to understand something," Mercer said into the broadcast. His voice had not changed in pitch or tempo since the first word. That consistency was deliberate, the tone of a man reading instructions, not issuing threats. "This is not revenge. Revenge is what you do when you have been hurt and want someone else to hurt. This is something else entirely." He paused, let the silence hold for 2 beats. "This is architecture. You built a system. You built it on captive bodies and compliance signals and 8 centuries of assumption that no one would ever reach the foundations. That no one would ever look at the signal that held everything together and think, what if that signal simply stopped?" The boots above were louder now, 2 floors up, 1 reinforced door remaining between the breach team and the stairwell to the basement level. Mercer heard the distinctive screech of a plasma cutter working through welded steel. Lyra glanced at him. He shook his head fractionally, "Not yet. Right now, in this moment, 7 teams are standing at your foundations. They have been there for months. They built their tools inside your walls. They walked past your guards every day. They ate in your cafeterias and cleaned your floors and carried your waste, and not one of your 800-year-old surveillance systems noticed them." 18 seconds. In approximately 15 seconds, your compliance network will go dark. simultaneously, on every world. And when it does, every single being you have held in chains, every Tesserani miner, every Corvith processor worker, every Silthari fabricator, every human child in your textile mills is going to wake up, all at once. 12 seconds. The plasma cutter broke through the last door. Mercer heard it crash inward, boots pounding down the stairwell. 10 seconds until the breach team reached the basement entrance, the final door, which Reyes now stood behind with his weapon raised and his jaw set. You are not being invaded. You are not being bombed. There is no fleet in your sky. There is just silence, the silence of a signal that used to hold 47 million minds in check and no longer does. 5 seconds. Lyra's hand closed on the detonator. The device was elegant, no moving parts, no chemical propellant, no detectable energy signature until the moment of activation. A capacitor array releasing stored charge in a single pulse. 4 months of assembly, 1 microsecond of execution. My name is Cale Mercer, and I'm the last thing you will ever hear on this channel. 0. 7 detonations, 7 worlds, simultaneous to within 11 milliseconds. On Axis Prime, the compliance signal, a low-frequency neural suppression wave that had been broadcasting continuously for 314 years without a single interruption, died mid-pulse. The silence was not gradual. It was absolute. One moment, 40 million branded beings felt the familiar pressure against the borders of their thoughts, the compression, the dulling, the quiet weight that made resistance feel like swimming through stone. The next moment, that weight was gone. For 3 seconds, nothing visible happened. 40 million minds, Tesserani, Corvith, Silthari, humans, and 14 other species, experienced the simultaneous sensation of a door opening inside their skulls. Not a metaphor. A physical sensation, pressure equalization, like ascending from depth. Thoughts that had been compressed into narrow channels suddenly had room to expand. Then the textile mill on District 14's lower level, staffed by 900 human children and 1,200 Tesserani adolescents, went quiet. Not the quiet of compliance, not the mechanical silence of suppressed minds performing repetitive tasks. The quiet of 2,100 young beings simultaneously realizing that the thing pressing against their thoughts was gone, that they could think clearly for the first time in months or years, or, for some of the Tesserani adolescents who had been born into captivity, the first time in their lives. A foreman, a Vithrani citizen named Coral, who had supervised this shift for 9 years, reached for his discipline rod. It was a reflex. 2,100 laborers had stopped working simultaneously. Protocol required correction. A 12-year-old human girl stood at her loom station 3 meters from him. Mara Osai, daughter of agricultural specialist Dr. Kwame Osai, separated from her father 17 months ago at the age of 11 and assigned to loom maintenance because her hands were small enough to clear the shuttle mechanisms without stopping the machines. She looked at the discipline rod. She looked at Coral's face, and she did not flinch. She had not been capable of not flinching for 17 months. The compliance signal had made the flinch involuntary, a neural response triggered by proximity to the rod, ensuring immediate submission before conscious thought could intervene. The flinch was gone. The signal was gone. Mara Osai stood at her loom and looked at Foreman Coral with an expression that was not rage, not fear, not defiance. It was clarity. The clarity of a child who could suddenly think clearly enough to understand exactly what had been done to her. Coral saw that expression. He saw it reflected on 2,100 faces simultaneously. And he understood, not gradually, not with the comfort of denial or rationalization, but in a single crystallizing instant, that the last 800 years had just ended. He dropped the rod, he ran. The cascades began within 60 seconds of signal death. On Korath 9, 300 human miners put down their tools in unison. Not a planned action, they had received no instructions, no advance warning. The compliance signal had simply stopped, and without it, the act of lifting a pick in a 60-degree shaft for the enrichment of their captors became a choice rather than a compulsion. 300 men made the same choice at the same moment. They stopped. They stood. They looked up at the 11 FiStorie supervisors on the elevated observation platforms. The supervisors had disciplinary weapons, neural prods designed to activate the pain receptors in compliance brands. Standard crowd control for non-cooperative labor. They raised the prods, pressed the triggers. Nothing happened. The prods relied on the same base frequency as the compliance signal to establish neural connection. Without the carrier wave, they were inert plastic. Lieutenant Annan's voice came over the mine's internal speaker system. She had wired into it 3 months ago during a maintenance shift, running a secondary audio line behind the legitimate cabling. The compliance signal is dead. Your discipline weapons are non-functional. There are 300 of us and 11 of you. I strongly suggest you sit down and wait. They sat. It took 4 seconds. On Axis 7, the chemical processor plant experienced a different cascade. 400 human women and 2,000 Silthari, a species whose average adult outmassed a FiStorie by 40%, kept docile for 6 generations by compliance suppression, walked out of the facility in organized columns. Not panicked, not violent, organized. This was Cell 3's preparation at work. Over 4 months, Sergeant Brannigan's covert contacts had reached hundreds of workers through whispered conversations during shift changes, passed messages in maintenance codes, left instructional patterns in the arrangement of cleaning supplies. Nothing that would trigger compliance monitoring. Nothing that required the workers to act while suppressed. Simply information, stored in minds that could not act on it until the moment they could. The instruction was simple: when the hum stops, walk to the transit hub at District Center. Do not fight, do not run, do not scatter, walk together in columns. They walked. The FiStorie garrison on Axis 7, 4,000 soldiers responsible for maintaining order among 60,000 workers, scrambled to respond. Their commanding officer, Garrison Commander Thress, issued deployment orders to all 12 security posts simultaneously. His communication system did not respond. The same spire that broadcast the compliance signal handled garrison communications. Cell 3 had not just killed the compliance frequency, they had killed the entire signal infrastructure. Every FiStorie military channel on Axis 7 went dark at the same moment the workers woke up. Thress had 4,000 soldiers. He could not tell any of them where to go. On Tesek 12, Cell 4's cascading firmware rewrite propagated through the planetary defense grid 6 seconds after the compliance signal died. The orbital weapons platforms, 47 independent stations, designed to atomize approaching threats from 12 light seconds, entered simultaneous diagnostic lockout, as their synchronization protocols failed to handshake with the compromised spire systems. They would remain inoperable for an estimated 19 days, while their firmware cycled through error correction routines that had been deliberately designed to loop. 3 million former slaves on Tesek 12 began to move while the sky above them sat defenseless. Not that it mattered, there was nothing approaching from above, not yet. Back on Axis Prime, Mercer's team had 53 seconds of broadcast time remaining before the security breach team reached the final basement door. He used them. To every Tesserani, Corvith, Silthari, and human hearing this, the signal is dead. It is dead on all 7 core worlds simultaneously. It will not come back. Your compliance brands are now inert. Your discipline weapons are non-functional. You are free to move, to choose, to stop working, to leave. Whatever you do next is yours. The final door buckled as the breach team applied a ram. Lyra was already moving to the secondary exit, a narrow drainage conduit that ran beneath the spire's foundations to a maintenance junction 400 meters east. Their escape route, Mapped during week 2 of infiltration, tested during week 8, confirmed clear during week 15. Hadid collapsed the transmission rig with a single thermite capsule. 4 months of painstaking assembly, hand-wound inductors, molecule-printed circuit boards, a power cell smuggled in as 12 separate inert components, and reassembled in this basement over 72 hours, reduced to white slag in 3 seconds. The broadcast ended. The screens across Axis Prime went static, then to default FiStorie standby patterns showing auction listings and compliance bulletins for a population that was no longer complying. The door breached as rays dropped through the drainage hatch behind Mercer. They sealed it from below, a simple mechanical lock that would hold for perhaps 2 minutes, more than enough. The tunnel stretched away into darkness. Mercer's cell moved through it at a measured pace, 12 people in single file, exfiltrating a capital city's security response through its own sewage infrastructure. Phase 2 positions, Mercer said, 16 hours. Phase 2 was not Mercer's design. Phase 2 was Admiral Chen's. Lord Keithrani's military was not small. 800 warships across his territory, crewed by loyal FiStorie citizens who had never been slaves and owed their prosperity to the tithe system. Professional soldiers with professional equipment, and a chain of command that did not depend on the compliant spires. The spires controlled the labor force. The military controlled itself. Lord Keithrani would order his fleet to converge on the rebelling core worlds. He would bombard from orbit if necessary. If the slave populations could not be restored to compliance, they would be eliminated and replaced. This was, in the cold calculus of ascendancy economics, cheaper than conceding the system's collapse. Admiral Chen had predicted this response with 94% confidence. Her analysts had modeled Keithrani's decision tree across 8,000 simulations. In every scenario where the compliance network failed, Keithrani's optimal move was military reconquest within 72 hours, which meant his entire fleet would be converging inward, pulling from garrison positions on the outer worlds, concentrating toward the 7 core systems, leaving the periphery empty. That was Domino 4. Because while Lord Keithrani ordered his fleet inward, Admiral Chen's 4th Fleet 900 warships that had been sitting in dark running mode at the edge of FiStorie space for 6 weeks, their drives cold, their signatures invisible, lit their engines. They did not enter FiStorie space shooting. They did not fire a single weapon. They entered broadcasting. FiStorie Ascendancy, this is Admiral Chen Weilin, United Earth Navy 4th Fleet. 900 warships are now entering your territorial space from 12 approach vectors. Your compliance infrastructure has been neutralized on all 7 core worlds. Your slave populations are in organized uprising across your territory. Your military is being recalled from garrison positions, leaving your outer systems undefended. A pause. Chen's voice was not angry, not threatening. It was informational, the tone of a weather report. We are not here to fight you. We are here to inform you that fighting is no longer a viable strategic option. Your control system is permanently destroyed. Your labor force is in open refusal. Your economy, which has depended exclusively on forced labor for 8 centuries, ceased to exist 7 minutes ago. You have nothing left to defend, and your fleet is now surrounded. Lord Keithrani received Chen's transmission in his residence on the 52nd floor. Around him, through the panoramic windows that usually showed an orderly capital, he could see columns of people, former laborers, former property, moving through the streets below in organized formations. Not burning, not looting, not attacking FiStorie citizens, simply walking. Away from the mills, away from the processing centers, away from the maintenance facilities and sanitation plants and construction yards where they had worked without choice for years or decades or lifetimes. That organization was what frightened him, a mob he could suppress, a riot he could quell, But this was not a mob. This was a population calmly withdrawing its labor in coordinated formations, as though someone had given them instructions months ago and they had waited patiently, silently, obediently for the moment those instructions became executable. "We have 800 warships," Lord Keithrani said to his remaining advisors. His voice was steady, but his hands, folded behind his back where no one could see them, had begun to tremble. "We retake the core worlds by force. The slave populations are unarmed." Fleet Admiral Lord Commander Sethais, the highest-ranking military officer in the Ascendancy, and a man who had served the Keithrani family for 40 years, shifted his weight. The shift was small. It was the largest expression of disagreement he had ever made in the High Ascendant's presence. "Ascendant, our garrisons on the 7 core worlds numbered 400,000 troops. Those garrisons maintained control ratios of approximately 1 soldier per 100 laborers. Without the compliance signal, those ratios are meaningless. Our 400,000 are now surrounded by 47 million former captives who are not attacking, but are also not obeying. And the human fleet, 900 warships, is now positioned between our converging forces and the core systems." They said they would not fight. Sethais chose his next words carefully. "They said fighting was not viable for us, Ascendant. That is a different statement. They did not say they would not fire. They said we have nothing left worth dying to hold." The domino chain was not a metaphor. It was a literal sequence of dependencies that Chen's Intelligence Directorate had mapped over 11 months of analysis. Each domino fell because the previous one had fallen. Each one created the conditions for the next, and each one was irreversible once it began. Domino 1. Compliance signals die simultaneously across all 7 core worlds. 47 million captive beings regain full volition. Immediate result: organized labor withdrawal. No violence required. Simply the collective decision of 47 million minds to stop performing work they no longer had to perform. Domino 2. Industrial output on all core worlds drops to 0 within hours. The Vithrani economy, which had not functioned without forced labor since its founding, begins to suffocate. Military supply chains dependent on extracted lithium, processed chemicals, and manufactured components lose their source. Domino 3. Vithrani military recalled from outer territories to restore order on core worlds. 800 warships converging inward. Garrison forces on peripheral systems reduced to skeleton crews. Domino 4. With military concentrated inward, Earth's 4th Fleet occupies the perimeter. 900 warships in a loose cordon around Vithrani territory. Not attacking, not blockading, simply present, ensuring the Vithrani fleet cannot retreat, resupply, or request external aid. Domino 5. Economy dead, military surrounded, population in refusal, leadership unable to communicate effectively with its own forces due to compromised signal infrastructure. Vithrani leadership has no leverage. No hostage value, the human operatives are already inside. No military superiority, they are surrounded and undersupplied. No economic continuity, their entire production base has stopped. Domino 6. Governments of 23 formerly enslaved species, Tesserani, Corvith, Silthari, and 20 others, file formal territorial sovereignty claims over the outer worlds under Galactic Precedent 7C, which establishes that territories absorbed through forced compliance are restorable to prior sovereignty upon demonstration of coercion. Domino 7. The UEN offers exactly one outcome: complete dissolution of the Vithrani Ascendancy as a political entity, permanent ban on neural compliance technology under the Thessalonica Accord, repatriation of all enslaved persons to their species of origin, war crimes prosecution for the leadership tier. 7 dominoes, 7 inevitabilities. The cascade was complete within 11 days. The first 48 hours tested the chain's weakest link, whether the freed populations would remain organized enough to sustain passive resistance without descending into reactive violence. On Axis Prime, Keith Ronnie's internal security forces local police, not military, attempted 3 times to disperse the assembly points where millions of former slaves had gathered. Each time they found not a mob but a formation. Rows of beings standing in absolute silence, hands visible at their sides, eyes forward. No weapons, no barricades, no chanting or demands, just mass. 40 million minds standing still, declining to work, declining to leave, declining to engage. The security forces raised weapons, issued dispersal orders. The formations did not react, they simply stood. You cannot arrest 3 million people. You can try to shoot them, but the moment you open fire on an unarmed crowd of that density, every recording device on the planet captures it. Every FiStorie citizen sees it. And the broadcast, Mercer's broadcast, still circulating on personal devices where citizens had recorded it before the screens went static, had told them exactly what would happen, exactly what their government would try, exactly why it would fail. The security forces withdrew. They did not fire. Their commanders, career police officers, not ideological enforcers, made the same calculation independently. This is not a situation that violence resolves. On Korath 9, the mining complex sat silent for the first time in 200 years. No lithium extraction. No ore processing. No transport loads departing for refinement. The FiStorie military's primary fuel source, lithium catalyst drive cores, began to run on reserves. Those reserves would last approximately 30 days at normal consumption. With 800 warships converging and maneuvering, consumption was not normal. On Tesek 12, Cell 4's firmware rewrite continued propagating through secondary systems. On day 2, it reached the planetary communications satellite network, introducing a cascading authentication failure that knocked civilian communications offline for 6 hours. The failure was not designed to be permanent, merely to demonstrate that the operatives who had compromised the defense grid could also compromise anything else, at any time, for as long as they remained undetected. Admiral Chen moved 12 heavy cruisers into orbital position above Tesek 12 on day 2, not firing, not threatening, visible, a reminder that the sky was occupied by people who meant what they said. On day 4, the first outer world declared independence. Tesserani 7, a world the Ascendancy had absorbed 4 centuries ago, whose native population had lived under compliance control for 16 generations, experienced collective self-governance for the first time in living memory. The Tesserani elders, a cultural preservation caste that had maintained oral traditions in secret, hidden behind the compliance signals limitations on organized resistance, emerged from 400 years of enforced irrelevance, and declared the Ascendancy's authority dissolved under the principle of original sovereignty. 6 hours later, 4 more worlds followed, then 8, then 12. Within 72 hours, 31 of 47 FiStorie worlds had declared independence or filed sovereignty claims with the Galactic Registrar. Lord Keith Ronnie's empire was not being conquered. It was not being bombed or blockaded or invaded. It was evaporating, dissolving like a structure that had been held together by a single wire, and the wire had been cut, and now each piece was simply falling away under its own weight. On day 6, Lord Keith Ronnie made his final attempt. He ordered his consolidated fleet, 600 warships concentrated around Axis Prime, the remainder scattered and unable to communicate, to begin orbital bombardment of the assembly points on his own capital world. The assembly points where millions of former slaves stood in silent formation, where 4,000 humans stood among them. The order was transmitted to Fleet Admiral Sethais. Sethais read it, he read it again, he set it down. Then he opened a channel to every ship in the FiStorie fleet. This is Fleet Admiral Lord Commander Sethais. I have received a direct order from the High Ascendant to initiate orbital bombardment of civilian population centers on Axis Prime. These centers contain unarmed persons of multiple species, including Vithrani citizens, former compliance subjects, and human nationals under the protection of the United Earth Navy. A pause, 600 ships, 600 bridges, 30,000 crew members listening. I am refusing this order. It violates Ascendancy Naval Code Section 41, which prohibits orbital strikes against sovereign territory without verified military target designation. The assembly points are not military targets. The persons within them are not combatants. Any captain who chooses to execute the High Ascendant's order may do so on their own authority and their own conscience. They will do so without my authorization. Of 600 captains, 3 acknowledged willingness to fire, 3 out of 600. Of those 3, 2 were immediately hailed by their own bridge crew's junior officers, invoking the mutiny provisions of Section 41C, which allowed subordinate officers to refuse execution of unlawful orders and demand command review. Both captains stood down within minutes. The third, a Captain Vorel, commanding the destroyer Exalted Purpose, fired a single kinetic round into an empty agricultural field 12 kilometers outside the capital. The round cratered dirt. Nobody was injured. The statement was made not by the shot, but by the fact that of 600 warships, one had fired 1 round into 1 empty field. That was the total military response of the Vithrani Ascendancy to the liberation of 47 million slaves. Lord Kithrani's fleet had refused him. His empire had refused him. The system he had inherited and maintained for 31 years had looked at his final order and said, no. On day 8, Admiral Chen transmitted her second message. It was addressed directly to Lord Kithrani but broadcast on open frequencies so that every party military, civilian, coalition, and galactic observer could hear it. Lord Kithrani, your fleet has declined to execute your orders. Your economy has not functioned for 8 days. 38 of 47 worlds have either declared independence or ceased communication with your administration. Your intelligence apparatus has failed to locate or neutralize any of the 84 operatives who disabled your infrastructure. Your compliance technology is permanently and irreversibly destroyed. A pause, not dramatic, functional. She was giving him time to absorb each fact before the next one landed. I am now going to tell you what happens in the next 72 hours. A formal coalition of 23 formerly enslaved species will file sovereign restoration claims under Galactic Precedent 7C for all territories acquired by the Ascendancy through forced compliance. The United Earth Navy will enforce these claims. Your military personnel will be offered full amnesty and repatriation to Axis Prime if they stand down immediately and surrender their vessels. Your leadership tier yourself, your High Council of 47, and your tithe administration of 312 will face tribunal for crimes against sentient persons under the Thessalonica Accord. Another pause. The Thessalonica Accord is new legislation. We drafted it for this circumstance. It criminalizes neural compliance slavery retroactively to first implementation. You will be the first prosecuted under its provisions. Given 8 centuries of continuous operation, you will not be the last. On day 11, Lord Vas Kithrani surrendered. He surrendered not to Admiral Chen, not to the coalition, not to the 84 operatives who had unmade his empire from its foundations. He surrendered to Fleet Admiral Sethais, who had assumed de facto administrative authority over Vithrani military forces on day 6, and had spent the intervening days negotiating amnesty terms for his personnel. The transfer was quiet, no ceremony, no declaration of victory or defeat. Lord Kithrani walked from his residence to an armored transport under escort, He passed through capital streets that were neither celebrating nor mourning. They were simply occupied by people going about the unprecedented work of building a civilization that had never existed, a Vithrani society that functioned without slaves. Some watched him pass. Most did not look up. He was already irrelevant, a historical figure in the present tense, overtaken by events he had not imagined possible. The Thessalonica survivors were recovered across all 7 worlds within the first 16 days. Of 4,112 taken, 3,941 were recovered alive. 171 had died during 17 months of captivity, mining collapses, chemical exposure, malnutrition, untreated illness, 2 suicides. Their names were read into the tribunal record individually. Each name took 9 seconds to speak. The reading lasted 25 minutes. The chamber was silent throughout. Mara Osei was reunited with her father, Dr. Kwame Osei, on day 16. She was 12 years old. She had spent 17 months operating industrial textile looms for 12 hours per day, 6 days per week. Her hands bore calluses that her father, an agricultural specialist, a man who grew things held between his own and could not look at for a long time. She did not cry. Neither did he. They stood together in the reunification center and held each other while, around them, hundreds of other families performed the same act of silent recognition. The tribunal lasted 4 months. Mercer did not attend. His broadcast preserved on every system it had touched, backed up by citizens who had recorded their screens, translated into 43 languages by the coalition's legal teams, served as the prosecution's opening exhibit. Lord Keithrani was sentenced to permanent confinement. His high council received the same. The tithe administrators, 312 bureaucrats who had managed the daily logistics of a slave economy for decades, were sentenced to 30 years of supervised reconstruction labor on projects chosen by the species they had administered. The parallel was noted in press coverage, but not commented on in the judgment. Before he left active service, Mercer gave one interview. 1. To a young Tesserani reporter named Hallie, the 14-year-old girl who had found him in the safe house on day 9, now working as an apprentice journalist for the coalition's independent press. She asked why he had chosen to explain the operation during the broadcast, rather than execute it in silence. He was quiet for a long time. Because that's what they never did, he said. 800 years of taking people, and they never once explained themselves, never once acknowledged that what they were doing required justification. They just did it, because the system allowed it, because no one made them stop. He looked at her. I wanted them to understand, not just that it was over, but why it was over, that what they built was fragile because any system built on captive bodies is fragile. The moment those bodies choose to stop, there is nothing underneath, nothing holding anything up. The entire structure was a signal, and we turned the signal off. He paused. The broadcast was not for Lord Keithrani. He was finished the instant the spires went dark. The broadcast was for everyone else in the galaxy who relies on compliant labor, on suppressed populations, on systems that only function because the people inside them have no choice. I wanted them to hear it. I wanted them to understand how thin the foundation is. 1 signal, 84 people, 11 days, 800 years gone. Hallie wrote it down, published it. It circulated across 47 former Vithrani worlds and beyond, into galactic networks that had never heard of the Thessalonica or Operation Domino or the Compliance Spires or Cale Mercer. Within 18 months of publication, 3 other civilizations quietly dismantled their compliance-based labor systems. No invasions. No broadcasts, no operations. Just the knowledge that someone had done it once, and the understanding that it could be done again. On the first anniversary, a monument was unveiled on Axis Prime, built by the Coalition, 23 species. It was a spire shaped deliberately like the communication towers that had broadcast captivity into 47 million minds. But this one was hollow, open at the top, nothing inside except air and light and the sound of wind moving through empty space. At its base, in 23 languages, the silence that set US free. Beneath it, 84 names. Mercer did not attend. He was teaching communications engineering at a technical college on Earth, building systems instead of unmaking them. But he received an image from Halley, the monument in daylight, the hollow center open to the sky. He looked at it for a long time. The idea had outlived the operation. That was always the point.